And to take a look at why we're talking about exercise, we need to take a closer look inside the brain. We'll take a journey deeper and deeper into the brain to look at the areas that control and influence movement, heading down to how the cells work and how they change and adapt in exercise. If we slice the brain at the right point, we can see the areas that play key roles in controlling our movement. Here we see in blue the basal ganglia and the thalamus. These are the areas that act like a filter, selecting and initiating the movements we consciously decide to make. The whole process starts with input from our senses and a desired goal. That might be to stand up and walk across the room, or to hit a winning return. The options of which movement are run through this circuitry until a final choice is made. Let's simplify this picture a little and add some colour. Let's look at an analogy for the workings at the cell level. Let's think of each area as a city of hundreds of thousands of factories. These cities work together in harmony to produce the total, you could say national output, which is movement. At the moment, the factories aren't communicating with other cities. They're ready, but not active, ticking over, ready to get to work. Let's take the substantia nigra as our focus, as this is the area affected in Parkinson's. Each factory represents a nerve cell or neuron. When it switches on, it gets to work and releases dopamine. We can think of these as trucks carrying messages. The trucks are released into the gap between the two factories, driving around until a parking space becomes available. As we'll see, what these messages say can depend on the type of parking place the receiving factory has. We can see that this purple GABA factory, GABA is just another chemical like dopamine, can respond in different ways to the dopamine truck messages. If the parking places it has are the green type, then the factory gets switched on and in turn releases GABA to send messages to the next connecting city along the chain. However, if the parking places are the red type, then the factory is told to stop production, temporarily closing, and the amount of produce, that's the messages going out, is reduced. So, when the dopamine factory is done, it switches off, back to the ready state. And this is when we meet the dopamine directors. It's their job to direct the trucks back to the factory, ready for the next time. So now let's look at what's happening in Parkinson's and then on to what happens with exercise. In Parkinson's, dopamine factories are lost, and therefore there is less dopamine around to stimulate or inhibit the GABA factories in striatum city. Here's where it gets really interesting, when we look at what happens when we introduce exercise. There are several ways we believe exercise changes how the brain works. First, we can get an increase in parking places. More exercise can equal more parking places. So more messages can be delivered from fewer trucks. The factory becomes sort of more sensitive. Whatever the amount of trucks, they have more opportunity and time to deliver the messages they carry and therefore have a bigger impact on the receiving factory. Second, we can get a reduction in the number of dopamine directors. We put some of them out of a job. This just means that there's less of them directing the trucks back into the dopamine factory, so that the trucks stick around for longer and therefore can pass on more messages. Third, we can actually get a balancing input from other cities, particularly the city in the north, the cortex. The cortex increases its activity to reduce the shortfall created by the loss of input from the substantia nigra city that happens in Parkinson's. So, although there are less messages coming in from the substantia nigra due to the loss of dopamine factories, there are more messages sent from other factories in the north. Fourth, and the final one we will cover here, is that the brain builds a better maintenance infrastructure. There is an increase in maintenance staff to keep the working factories in tip-top condition, and shops are built around the factory to support the factories that are working. So as we see from this, there isn't an actual increase in dopamine in response to exercise, but the brain adapts to make the dopamine that remains work better and more efficiently.